You think because I'm a girl behind a counter, I don't know what you're doing? Maya's voice didn't shake. Not even a little. I see exactly what you are. Derek Vaughn smiled the way men smile when they've already decided how the story ends. He was wrong about a lot of things that afternoon. But he was most wrong about her. If this story moves you, please subscribe to the channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far the story traveled. The rain had been falling since early morning. The kind of steady, gray rain that makes a small town feel even smaller. That turns a Tuesday into something that presses down on your shoulders before you've even had your second cup of coffee. Maya Collins had been at the rental shop since 7, which was her habit. She liked the quiet hour before the first customers arrived, liked the smell of motor oil and old leather and the faint sound of rain hitting the metal roof above the service bay. She liked the way Silver Creek felt in the morning, before anyone had a chance to ruin it. She was behind the counter, sorting through a stack of reservation folders when the bell above the front door rang. She didn't look up right away. She heard boots on the floor. More than one pair. She heard the particular sound of men who walk into a room like they already own it, that deliberate, unhurried wait in every step that is designed to make everyone else feel smaller. She looked up. There were 4 of them. 3 men she didn't recognize and 1 she did. Not personally, but by reputation. Derek Vaughn. Anyone who'd spent more than 6 months in Silver Creek knew who Derek Vaughn was, even if they pretended they didn't, even if they looked away when they saw him coming. He was in his mid-40s. Dressed the way men dress when they want you to see their money, without them having to announce it. Watch on his wrist that cost more than most people's cars. Jacket that fit too perfectly to be anything but custom. Hair that was silver at the temples in the careful way that said groomed and not aged. He walked in like he'd already measured the room and found it beneath him, and he moved toward the counter with the easy confidence of someone who had never once in his adult life been told no and had to live with the answer. The 3 men behind him spread out without being told to. That was a practice thing. That was rehearsed. Maya set down the reservation folders. "Good morning," she said. "Can I help you?" Derek Vaughn looked at her the way men look at furniture. He looked at the counter, at the row of helmet displays along the wall, at the key rack behind her head, and then finally, almost as an afterthought, at her face. "I need to speak to the owner," he said. "He's in the back." She kept her voice level. "I can help you with whatever you need while you wait." "Are you looking to rent or—" "I didn't ask if you could help me." His tone wasn't loud. "It didn't need to be. I said I need to speak to the owner." Maya looked at him for a moment. She had been looked at like that before. By other men in other rooms. Men who assumed that a young woman behind a counter was simply part of the furniture, that her only function was to nod and step aside and make things easy for them. She had learned a long time ago that there were 2 ways to respond to a man like that. You could shrink, or you could hold your ground and see what he did next. She held her ground. "I'll let him know you're here," she said. "Can I get your name?" Something flickered in Derek Vaughn's eyes. Not anger, not yet. Something more controlled than anger. Something that in another context you might have called amusement, except there was nothing in it that resembled warmth. "Vaughn," he said. "Derek Vaughn. He'll know who I am." She picked up the desk phone and pressed the intercom. "Jackson, there's a Mr. Vaughn here to see you." A pause. Then Jackson's voice, low and unhurried, came through the speaker. "Tell him I'll be right out." Derek turned and moved toward the center of the showroom floor like he was inspecting property he was considering buying. His 3 men stayed where they were, 1 near the door, 1 by the window display, 1 drifting toward the door that led to the service bay. That last one made the back of Maya's neck go tight. "That door leads to our private work area," she said. "Customers aren't supposed to go back there." The man near the service door looked at Derek. Derek nodded barely and the man stopped moving. "Nice little place." Derek said. Not to her specifically, but to the air in the room. "Jackson's had it, 12 years now?" 14, Maya said. 14, he nodded slowly. "Long time to be in one spot." Man gets attached after that long. He starts to feel like his whole world is 4 walls and a parking lot. He turned to look at her then. Directly. And for the first time since he'd walked in, he actually seemed to be seeing her instead of looking through her. "You been here long?" "Long enough," she said. He studied her for a second. "You're loyal. That's sweet. The word came out flat, drained of any actual respect. Loyalty to someone else's dream is still someone else's dream. Before Maya could answer, the door to the back opened and Jackson Reed walked out. He was not a tall man. He was 58 years old. He's built the way men who've spent their lives working with their hands are built, solid through the shoulders. Nothing wasted. Nothing soft. His hair had gone fully silver years ago, and he kept it short. His face had the kind of lines that come from decades of weather and honest work, and, if you look closely enough, grief. He wore a plain gray t-shirt with a smear of grease across the forearm, and he didn't apologize for it. He looked at Derek Vaughn, and he didn't say anything right away. He looked at the three men positioned around his showroom floor, and he took that in without any change in his expression. "Derek," he said finally. "Jackson." Derek moved toward him with his hand extended, like this was going to be cordial, like they were old friends meeting for lunch. "It's good to finally do this face to face." Jackson shook his hand once, brief and firm. "A conversation." Derek glanced at Maya. "It's private. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my employee," Jackson said. "She runs half this operation. There's nothing I'd discuss without her." Derek's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Have it your way." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded envelope which he set on the counter between them. "I've been looking at this property for a while. You've done well with it, truly. But Silver Creek is changing, Jackson. There's development coming. Real money. The kind of growth that makes certain types of business." He paused, considering his words with the theatrical care of a man who enjoys the performance complicated. Jackson didn't touch the envelope. "What's in here?" "A purchase offer. A very good one, I should say. More than fair market value. Enough for a man in your position to retire comfortably, start something new, somewhere quieter, somewhere that isn't going to be surrounded by construction and rezoning for the next 5 years." "I'm not selling," Jackson said. Derek nodded slowly, as if he'd expected exactly that response and had already decided what came next. "I thought you might say that, but I'd encourage you to look at the numbers before you." "I'm not selling," Jackson said again. No heat in it. No wavering. The room changed. It was subtle, the way a room changes when something that was pretending to be one thing finally stops pretending. Derek's careful, polished ease dropped just a degree, just enough to see what was underneath it, something harder, something that had spent a long time getting what it wanted through, means that never made it into any legal document. "Jackson," his voice dropped, "I'm trying to give you an exit that doesn't hurt. You should take it. Is that a threat?" "I'm a businessman," Derek said. "I don't threaten people. I offer them options and I let them choose." He picked the envelope back up off the counter and held it out toward Jackson. "Take the offer. Consider it for a week. Think about the people who work for you. Think about what it looks like when a business gets buried in regulatory issues, code violations, surprise inspections." He let that land. "Think about what that does to a young woman who depends on a paycheck from a shop that can't stay open." Maya had been very still through all of this. Now she spoke. "Are you seriously standing there threatening his business because he won't sell to you?" Derek turned to look at her slowly. "I'm sorry, I didn't get your name." "Maya. Maya." He said it like he was filing it away. "You seem smart. Smart enough to know when a situation has consequences that reach further than just the man at the top." His eyes held hers. "This isn't personal. It's business. What you just said about inspections and code violations," Maya said, "that sounds like extortion." One of the men near the window shifted. Derek held up one hand without breaking eye contact with Maya, and the man went still. "You have a sharp tongue," Derek said. "That's a difficult thing for a woman in an uncertain employment situation." Maya felt the anger move through her like heat, starting in her chest and spreading outward. She had heard things like that before. Softer versions of the same threat. Your safety depends on your silence. Your livelihood depends on your compliance. Your whole future is something a man like me can make very small. She had heard it, and she had survived it, and she was still standing behind this counter because she had refused to fold. "You need to leave," she said. Something shifted in the room. The man near the service bay door took a step. The one near the window moved away from the wall. The one by the front door put his hand on the frame. Derek Vaughn looked at Jackson with something that had finally dropped all of its pretense. There was no smile now, no performance of reasonableness. "Last chance," Derek said. "Easy exit. Nobody loses anything they can't replace. Or we do this the other way, and I promise you, the other way is not something either of you will enjoy." Jackson Reed was quiet for a moment. Maya watched him. She had worked for this man for 3 years, and she had never once seen him lose his composure. He's not with difficult customers. He's not with suppliers who shorted him. He's not with the bank when the loan had gotten hard. He was the most unshakable person she had ever met, and she had never fully understood why, until right now standing in this room watching him absorb a threat without flinching. Because some people are afraid and it shows, and some people have already been through the worst and it shows. And Jackson Reed was unmistakably the second kind. "I'm going to ask you one more time to leave," Jackson said quietly. "Please, you and your men, take your offer, and don't come back. Whatever you're planning, whatever comes next, think hard before you take that step." "He's very hard." Derek stared at him. "Is that supposed to mean something?" It means exactly what it sounds like," said. "He's a warning, the kind I give once." Derek laughed then. "He's a short, dismissive sound. You're a mechanic, Jackson. A good one, I'm sure, but a mechanic." He buttoned his jacket. "I'll give you 48 hours. The offer stands." After that, he shrugged. "Things get less friendly." He turned and walked toward the door. His men followed. Pulling out in the practiced formation they'd entered with. The last one, pulling the front door shut behind them with a deliberate unhurried click. The shop was very quiet. Maya exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Jackson," she said. "What just happened?" He was looking at the front window, watching the cars outside. He didn't answer right away. "Jackson." He turned to look at her. His expression hadn't changed, not really. But his eyes had something in them she hadn't seen before. Something old. Something that belonged to a version of him she didn't know existed. "Go through every file cabinet in the back office," he said. "Any folder you don't recognize, any document that looks like it came in from outside, set it aside. Don't throw anything away. What am I looking for?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But I want to know what that man has already gotten his hands into before today." He moved toward the service bay door and pushed through it. And Maya stood there for a moment behind the counter. Alone in the showroom. And she heard something she had never heard from the back of the shop before. Jackson Reed on the phone. His voice low enough that she couldn't make out words, just tone. And the tone was something she could only describe as a door being opened in a wall she hadn't known existed. She went to the filing cabinets. She found the first one in 40 minutes. It was a folder tucked behind the vehicle maintenance logs in the third cabinet, and it had no label on the tab, which was how she almost missed it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a document that looked like a standard commercial lease agreement except for the clause buried in paragraph 9, subsection 3. In language so carefully bland that it took her reading it 3 times before she understood what it actually said. It gave a company called Halcyon Properties LLC the right of first refusal on any sale or transfer of the business and the underlying property at a price to be determined by Halcyon's internal evaluation, not by market value, not by independent appraisal, but by whatever number Halcyon decided to assign. Maya stood in the back office holding that single sheet of paper, and she felt the particular cold clarity of understanding something that makes you realize every assumption you had was wrong. She went to the door. "Jackson." He appeared in the service bay doorway. He looked at the paper in her hand. "Where was that?" he said. "Third cabinet behind the maintenance logs." "Jackson, did you sign this?" He crossed the room and took the paper from her and read it. She watched his face. The only thing that changed was the set of his jaw, a tightening, the particular compression of a man who has been handed confirmation of something he suspected, but hoped wasn't true. "No," he said. "I did not sign this." "Then how did it get here?" "Someone put it here." He set the paper on the desk. "Keep looking." She kept looking. By the time she found the second document, a different lease addendum, the signature at the bottom, a near-perfect replica of Jackson's, she had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. By the third document, this one purporting to be a letter from Jackson, expressing interest in selling to Halcyon Properties, she understood with complete clarity that Derek Vaughn hadn't come here today to make an offer. He'd come here to tell Jackson that the trap was already closed. She brought the stack of papers out to the showroom where Jackson was waiting. He sat on the edge of the counter, and she laid them out in front of him one by one, and he looked at each one without speaking. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. "He's been setting this up for months," she said. Jackson said, "These signatures, forged." He said it without hesitation. I know my own hand. That isn't it. He picked up the lease addendum and studied the bottom of the page. But it's close. Close enough that to someone who doesn't know me, in the right context, it might hold up. Please, can you fight it? Yes, he said. Please. But it takes time, and it takes money, and it takes the right lawyer. Please. And while you're fighting it, please, they can do exactly what he said, code inspections. Please, regulatory pressure. Please, make the business impossible to operate. They don't need to win the legal argument. They just need to make the fight painful enough that walking away looks better than staying. Maya thought about that. She thought about what it would mean for Jackson 14 years, everything he'd built, gone because a man with enough money and enough patience had decided he wanted what didn't belong to him. She thought about other things too. She thought about the other shops she'd walked past in Silver Creek, the ones with the lights on that never seemed to have many customers anymore. The ones where the owners looked tired in a particular way that she now suspected had a very specific cause. Jackson, she said, how many other businesses has he done this to? Jackson looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something shift, something that told her he had been thinking about exactly that question for longer than this afternoon. That's what I need to find out, he said. He picked up his phone. He walked toward the back of the shop, and Maya stood in the doorway between the showroom and the service bay and watched him dial a number she was sure he hadn't dialed in a very long time. And she heard him say the name of someone she had never heard him mention, and when he started speaking, his voice had a quality to it that she could only describe as the sound of a door swinging open on rusty hinges, something unlocking that had been locked for a very long time. She went back to the filing cabinet. She kept looking. By late afternoon, she had found 11 documents, 11 pieces of a paper trail that didn't exist in any legitimate version of the business's history. 11 pieces of something that someone had built with great care and patience and intent, designed to look like the kind of slow accumulation of ordinary paperwork that wouldn't raise any flags until the moment they needed it to. She spread them all out on the floor of the back office in the order she'd found them, and she stood over them and she tried to read the story they told. And the story they told was not complicated. It was actually very simple, in the way that terrible things are often very simple once you see them clearly. Derek Vaughn had decided he wanted this property. He had decided this months ago, maybe longer. He had obtained, through means she could only guess at, access to the business's files, a break-in, a bribed contractor, someone with a key who shouldn't have had one. He had planted documents that would give Halcyon Properties legal leverage over the business. He had then come in today to let Jackson know, in terms that were just vague enough to be deniable, that the leverage existed and that fighting it would be expensive and painful, and that the easier choice was to take the money and disappear. It was elegant, in a horrible way. It was the kind of scheme that worked, because it counted on the target's isolation. Jackson Reed was a single business owner in a small town. He didn't have a legal team on retainer. He didn't have investors or corporate backing or political connections. He had a shop and a reputation for being good at his work, and a 24-year-old employee who sorted reservation folders and answered the phone. What Derek Vaughn had not accounted for, could not have known to account for, because nobody in Silver Creek knew, was that when Jackson Reed picked up his phone in the back of that shop and dialed that number with the rusty hinge quality in his voice, he had just sent a message to a network that spanned multiple states and 3 decades of loyalty. He had not asked for help in 22 years. When a man like that finally asked, the answer was not going to be small. Maya was still on her knees on the floor of the back office, organizing documents, when she heard the first motorcycle. She told herself it was a customer. She told herself she'd imagined the sound, or that it was just a single rider passing on the highway out front, one of the dozens who came through Silver Creek on any given afternoon. Then she heard the second one, then 5. Then what sounded like the entire sky was moving, like the air itself was changing pressure, like something was building outside the walls of this building that was so much larger than anything she had a frame of reference for. She stood up. She walked out of the back office. She walked through the service bay and into the showroom, and she looked out the front window. The street outside was filling with motorcycles, not trickling, filling. The way a flood fills a low valley, sudden and complete, and with a force that makes you understand very quickly that the landscape is changing whether you like it or not. They came from both directions. They came in loose formation, The way riders move, when there are enough of them, that formation is more about direction than discipline. When the group itself is large enough to change the character of the road it travels on. Maya Collins stood behind the counter of Reed's Cycles and Rentals, and she watched 230 motorcycles pull into the street in front of the shop, and she did not move for a very long time. Behind her, the door to the service bay opened. Jackson Reed walked into the showroom and stood beside her and looked out the window at what had come. His face was very still. But Maya, who had worked beside this man for 3 years and learned to read the specific language of his silences, saw something in him that she had no word for except this. A man who had believed for a very long time that a part of his life was over, realizing that that part of his life had never really left, that it had waited, that it had remembered him even when he was doing his best to forget it. Jackson, she said softly. Who are those people? He was quiet for a moment, just watching. Brothers, he said. Maya looked at him. She looked at the street outside. She looked at the 230 riders who had come to a town they'd never been to because a single phone call had crossed a silence of 22 years, and they had come anyway. And she understood, standing there in the quiet of the shop, with the sound of engines dying down one by one outside, that this was not over. It was, in fact, only beginning, because Derek Vaughn had built his entire strategy on a single assumption that Jackson Reed was alone. And he had never been more wrong about anything in his life. The engines cut one by one, and the silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses against the windows and the walls and settles into the chest of anyone standing inside it. Maya hadn't moved from behind the counter. She wasn't sure her legs would carry her if she tried. Jackson stood beside her, and he was the stillest thing in the room. Outside, riders were dismounting, not rushing, not posturing, not doing any of the things she might have expected from 230 men arriving somewhere en masse. They moved with the particular calm of people who have been in serious situations before and have learned that economy of motion is its own kind of power. They stood near their bikes. They talked to each other in low voices. They waited. One man separated from the group and walked toward the front door. He was older, mid-60s. Maya guessed, with a gray beard trimmed close and eyes that had the weathered, patient quality of someone who had spent decades watching situations develop and learning when to move and when to hold still. He was not the biggest man out there. He was not the loudest. But every rider near him adjusted slightly when he walked, the way people unconsciously shift to create space for the person whose gravity they feel without having to explain it. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Jackson moved from behind the counter and met him in the center of the showroom floor, and the two men looked at each other for a moment, without speaking, and in that silence, Maya felt the entire weight of something she was not part of. 20 years of history, of a life Jackson had lived before Silver Creek, before this shop, before the version of himself that she knew. You actually called, the man said. I did, Jackson said. 22 years, Jackson. I know, the man exhaled. Not with frustration, not with accusation, with something that sounded more like relief, actually, like a breath that it had been half held for 2 decades and was finally allowed to complete itself. I was starting to think you'd gone all the way quiet on us. I almost did, Jackson said, but something came up. So I heard. The man looked past Jackson to Maya, and his eyes were direct and not unkind. You the one who found the papers? Maya blinked. You already know about the papers? Jackson talked for about 40 seconds on that phone call, the man said. That's more than he said to me in 2 decades. I figured the situation was specific. He looked back at Jackson. How many documents? 11 so far, Maya said. Forged signatures. Planted lease addenda. Something called Halcyon Properties, which I'm going to guess is a shell company. It is, the man said. And the certainty in those 2 words told her everything she needed to know about how much he already knew, not about this shop, but about Derek Vaughn. 3rd LLC he's used. The first 2 got dissolved when things got legally inconvenient. He extended his hand to Maya. Tommy Briggs, I ride with the Colorado chapter, Maya Collins. Jackson's told me about you, he said. She looked at Jackson. You've been in contact with him? Not often, Jackson said. Twice in the last year, emails, a pause. He knew where I was. He always knew where I was. I just didn't know he knew. Tommy looked at him with something that might have been the oldest version of exasperation. We always know where our people are, Jackson. That's not surveillance. That's family. Jackson said nothing to that. All right, Tommy said, moving toward the counter like a man who has walked into a complicated situation and is already organizing it in his head. Walk me through what happened this morning. Everything, starting from when they walked in. Maya told it. She told it in the order it happened, without editorializing, and Tommy Briggs listened the way someone listens when they already suspect the shape of something, but need the specific details to know where to push. He stopped her twice. Once when she described the man who had drifted toward the service bay door, and once when she got to the moment Derek had said her name. He said your name, Tommy repeated, like he was filing it. That's exactly how it felt, she said. Tommy looked at Jackson. He's already looked her up. Before he walked in here, he would have known who works here. How long, what they know about the business. He paused. He came in prepared to use pressure on multiple fronts. That's not a man making an offer. That's a man executing a plan that's already in motion. I know, Jackson said. The documents she found, those weren't planted today. Those took time. Access. I had a contractor do some electrical work about 8 months ago, Jackson said slowly. He came recommended through the Chamber of Commerce. Tommy's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Chamber of Commerce in this town, who runs it? A woman named Patricia Holt, Maya said. She's been director for about 4 years. We'll need to look at that connection, Tommy said. If Vaughn has someone in the chamber, he has a network for placing trusted contractors into target businesses. That's how the access happened. He picked up one of the forged documents that Maya had brought to the front and examined the signature. This is good work. He's got someone professional doing his forgeries. This isn't a backroom job. Can we use these against him? Maya asked. If we can prove they're forged. Yes, Tommy said. But proving forgery takes expert analysis, which takes time, which is exactly what he's counting on you not having. He comes back in 48 hours with a legal team and those documents as leverage. And even if you know they're fake, you're going to spend months untangling it while he applies pressure from every other angle. Maya felt the cold logic of it close around her like a trap snapping shut. So what do we do? Tommy put the document down. He looked at Jackson. Tell her. Jackson was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the front window, at the street outside where his brothers were standing. Derek Vaughn has been working on Silver Creek for a long time, he said. What he did to us today, the planted documents, the false leverage, the pressure to sell, he didn't build that system for one shop. That takes infrastructure, and infrastructure means other victims. Maya looked at him. You think he's done this to other businesses? I think we're not the first, Jackson said. And I think the only reason the others didn't fight back is because they didn't have a reason to believe fighting was possible. We give them a reason, Tommy said simply. That's why we're here. Not to stand in the street looking impressive. That part comes later if it needs to. Right now, we're here to help you build something that holds up. He looked at Maya. You said you found 11 documents. How long did that take you? About an hour and a half, she said. Then spend the next hour going back through every cabinet, every drawer, everywhere. If he planted 11, there may be more. We document everything. We photograph it. We get it out of this building tonight before anyone has a chance to do anything about it. You think he'd come back? Maya asked. If he finds out she's been digging, Jackson said, yes. That was when the front door opened again. It wasn't Tommy's men. It was a woman Maya recognized, Carol Yoon, who ran the small bakery 3 blocks down on 5th Street. Carol was 51 years old and had the kind of face that was permanently set in pleasant lines from years of customer-facing work. But right now, her expression was something else entirely. Right now, Carol Yoon looked like a woman who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time and had just seen a door open that she wasn't sure she was allowed to walk through. She looked at the men in the shop, at Tommy Briggs, at Jackson. She looked at Maya. I heard, Carol said, about what happened this morning. Word travels fast in this town when it wants to. Carol, Maya said carefully. You okay? No, Carol said, I'm not actually. She took a breath. He came to me too, about 6 months ago. Different pitch, not buying the bakery outright, just a partnership agreement that would give his company a stake in the business in exchange for what he called development support. She made a small, bitter sound. I signed it. I didn't understand what I was signing. Not fully. And my lawyer at the time was, well, he turned out to have other clients I wasn't aware of. Jackson and Tommy exchanged a look. Your lawyer, Tommy said. What was his name? Gregory Taft, Carol said. He retired suddenly about 4 months ago. He's moved out of state. Of course he did, Tommy said under his breath. I've been paying a monthly fee to Halcyon Properties for 6 months, Carol said. It started small. Last month it doubled. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. I didn't come here to ask for anything. I came here because I thought if you were fighting, I wanted to know. I wanted to know if it was possible. Maya came around from behind the counter. She crossed the room and stood in front of Carol, and she said, as directly and plainly as she knew how to say anything, it's possible. We're fighting, and we need what you have, the agreement, the payment records, everything. Carol blinked. You want my documents. I want your evidence, Maya said. Because if he did this to you and he did this to us, he did it to other people too. And if we can show a pattern, you can go after the whole operation instead of just defending one shop, Tommy said from behind her. He was looking at Carol with the particular attention of a man who has just understood that the situation is both worse and better than he thought worse, because the corruption is wider than one business. He's better because more victims means more witnesses, more documents, more threads to pull. Mrs. Yoon, do you know of any other business owners he's approached? Carol was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved to the window, to the street outside, to the rows of motorcycles she'd had to walk through to get to the door. 5, she said, that I know of personally. There may be more. The room went very quiet. Maya looked at Jackson. Jackson was looking at Carol. Tommy Briggs was looking at nothing in particular, but his jaw had set in a way that told her he was already thinking 3 moves ahead. 5 said, at minimum, Carol said. Frank DeLuca at the hardware store. He sold out completely about 8 months ago and left town. I always thought it was strange Frank's family had been here for 3 generations. Then there's the Rivera family's auto body shop. They've been paying into this thing for almost a year. And the flower shop on Clement and Briggs, no relation to anyone here. That's just her married name. She's been fighting with her bank about a loan she doesn't remember taking out. He refinanced her property without her knowledge, Tommy said flatly. It wasn't a question. I think so, Carol said. She's been dealing with the legal side of it alone because she can't afford the right kind of lawyer. Something moved through the room then. Maya felt it, not an atmosphere of panic, but its opposite, the particular shift that happens when scattered pieces suddenly lock into a shape and people see it at the same time. This was not about one motorcycle shop. This was not about one forged document or one threat delivered in the polished, careful language of a man who had done this many times before. This was a machine. A patient, methodical machine that had been running for years in this town, feeding on the isolation of its victims, on their belief that they had no recourse, that fighting back was a fantasy afforded only to people with resources they didn't have. Jackson, Maya said quietly, you need to make more calls. He looked at her. In his expression, she saw something she recognized from the moment the first motorcycle had pulled into the street, that unlocking, that opening of something that had been kept shut for a long time. Except this time it wasn't just a door swinging open. This time it was a whole wall coming down, Tommy, Jackson said. How many people do we have outside who know their way around a legal document? Tommy almost smiled, more than you'd think. And contacts in the county recorder's office, state regulatory agencies? We've had reasons to understand how those systems work, Tommy said. Yeah, then we set up here tonight, Jackson said. This shop becomes a working room. We collect every document from every business owner who's willing to come forward. We build the full picture. He paused. And we figure out exactly who Derek Vaughn is, how far his network runs, and where the thing breaks. It breaks at Halcyon, Maya said, and both men looked at her. She had been thinking while the others were talking, turning the pieces in her head the way she always did, when a problem was just a pattern waiting to be read. Halcyon Properties is the mechanism. All the agreements, all the forged documents, everything flows through that LLC. If we can get the incorporation records, the beneficial ownership, if there's a registered agent, if any of those documents have been notarized, you can trace it, Tommy said, and now the almost smile was fully present. He looked at Jackson. She's good. I know, Jackson said. Notarized documents have to have a licensed notary, Maya continued, moving toward the back office, because her brain was already 3 steps ahead of her feet. A licensed notary can be traced. Notaries keep logs. They're required to by state law. If the same notary appears on multiple forged documents across multiple businesses, That's conspiracy, Tommy said. That's a much bigger legal problem than a business dispute. Yes. That's federal, Jackson said quietly. Maya was already at the filing cabinet. She pulled out the folder she'd found first and flipped to the bottom of the page. Yes. There was a notary stamp, slightly smudged but readable. She took out her phone and photographed it. She pulled the next document. Yes. Same notary. She pulled the third. Same stamp, Jackson, she called through the doorway. Yes, I need Carol's documents. Tonight, Carol Yoon appeared in the doorway of the back office. She was looking at Maya with an expression that Maya recognized because she had worn it herself. Years ago, in a different life, the look of someone who has been afraid for so long that they have begun to mistake the fear for wisdom, have begun to believe that the fear is the only realistic response to a world that genuinely does not have room for them, and who is now watching someone else refuse that premise so completely that the whole structure of that belief starts to tremble. I can go get them now, Carol, the originals. Go, Maya said, and call the others. DeLuca, even if he's left town, he may still have copies. The Riveras and Briggs. Anyone Vaughn has touched. Tell them to bring everything. Carol pulled out her phone as she turned to leave. At the door she stopped. She looked back at Maya over her shoulder. Why are you doing this, she asked, not skeptically. Genuinely, with the kind of careful wonder that belongs to people who have spent too long in situations where the question of why someone would help is not rhetorical. Maya looked at her. She thought about how to answer that, and then decided that the honest answer was the only one worth giving. Because 6 months ago, if I'd walked in on something like this happening to someone else, she said, I would have needed to know it was possible. That somebody would stand up. A pause. Someone stood up for me once. I'm returning the favor. Carol held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded one firm, decisive nod and walked out. What happened in the next 3 hours was the kind of organized chaos that only makes sense in retrospect, when you can look back at the individual pieces and see the shape they were building toward. Tommy Briggs had pulled 4 of his most detail-oriented writers inside the shop. One of them, a quiet man named Garrett, who had apparently spent 10 years as a paralegal before he found his way to a different life, was already at the desk in the back office with a legal pad, creating an index of every document Maya had found. He's cataloging each one by type, by date, by the notary stamp at the bottom. 2 other writers' women, which had surprised Maya until she realized she was surprised and then felt embarrassed. By the surprise, had set up at the counter in the showroom with laptops, running searches on Halcyon Properties LLC through the state's business registry database. Tommy himself was on the phone, and from the fragments Maya caught as she moved between the back office and the front, he was talking to someone who clearly knew the county recorder personally. And Jackson Reed was outside with the rest of them, moving through the crowd of riders with a quiet authority that she watched through the window and couldn't fully process. Because the man she was watching out there was not exactly the same man who fixed motorcycle engines in the service bay every morning. He was both. He was the mechanic, and he was something else that the mechanic had been quietly carrying this whole time. He was speaking to people, listening, directing, the way people direct things, not with orders, but with clarity, with the particular competence of someone who knows what they're doing and makes other people believe that too. Maya pressed her forehead briefly against the window glass. She thought, I have worked for this man for 3 years. I have had no idea. Then she went back to the filing cabinet because there was still work to do. The second twist came at 8:17 that evening, when Garrett called her name from the back office with a very specific quality in his voice, quiet and controlled in the way that signals the opposite of calm, ease. She came through the doorway, and he was sitting at the desk with one of the laptop screens in front of him and an expression on his face like a man who has opened a door expecting a closet and found a hallway. The beneficial ownership records for Halcyon Properties, he said. They finally came through from the state registry. And Garrett turned the screen toward her. Maya read the registered owner's name. She read it twice. She turned and walked through the service bay and into the showroom and out the front door, and found Jackson in the crowd and said, very quietly so that only he could hear her, Jackson, the person Derek Vaughn has been using as the legal front for Halcyon Properties. He looked at her. It's Patricia Holt, she said, the director of the Chamber of Commerce, the woman who recommended the contractor who had access to your filing cabinets. Jackson's jaw was very still. The woman who every business owner in this town goes to when they need local support or resources, Maya said. She's been the one steering them toward Vaughn. She's been the gateway. She would have known who was vulnerable, Jackson said slowly. Which businesses were struggling, which owners were isolated, which people didn't have the connections to fight back. She's been running the intake, Maya said. Vaughn provides the money and the muscle. She provides the information. They looked at each other in the evening air with 230 bikes parked around them and a shop full of people building a case. And the weight of that particular understanding settled between them with a completeness that left no room for uncertainty. How many people trusted her? Maya asked. In this town? Jackson said. Almost everyone. Maya nodded slowly. She thought about Carol Yuen's hands shaking on those documents. She thought about Frank DeLuca's family 3 generations gone. She thought about Ann Briggs fighting her bank alone, without the right kind of lawyer, without any idea how far the web around her actually extended. She thought about the contractor 8 months ago, working in the back of this shop. Friendly man, she remembered, offered Jackson coffee. Commented on the collection of vintage manuals on the shelf above the filing cabinets. We need to move faster, she said. If Patricia Holt finds out we've pulled the ownership records, she'll warn him, Jackson said, and if he knows we know, he won't wait 48 hours. They both turned and went back inside. Tommy was off the phone. He read their faces the moment they came through the door. What happened, he said. Maya told him. Tommy Briggs sat with it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he stood up from where he'd been leaning against the counter, and he raised his voice just enough to reach across the room. And what he said next was 6 words, spoken with the flat precision of a man who has made decisions like this before. We go tonight. All of it now. Nobody in the room argued. Nobody hesitated. They had been waiting for the shape of the thing to become clear enough to act, and now it was clear. And they were people who knew what to do when clarity arrived. Maya looked at the stack of documents on the desk. She thought about Patricia Holt. She thought about Derek Vaughn, somewhere in this town right now, comfortable in the assumption that a mechanic and a young woman behind a counter could not possibly have the resources or the network or the sheer nerve to threaten everything he had built. She picked up her phone and called Carol Yuen. Carol, she said when Carol answered. You still have the payment records, the monthly fees to Halcyon? Yes, I'm on my way back with everything. Good. And Carol, do you know Patricia Holt? A pause. Longer than Maya expected. Long enough that the quality of the silence told her something before Carol spoke. She's the one who introduced me to Gregory Taft, Carol said. He's my lawyer, the one who retired suddenly. Maya closed her eyes for 1 second. I know, she said. I know. Come straight here and don't talk to anyone on the way. She hung up. She looked at Jackson, who was watching her. How many people has Patricia Holt introduced to Gregory Taft? She said. Jackson's expression answered before he did. We're going to find out, he said. And in the front showroom, through the window, the street was still full of bikes, and the evening light was starting to go amber, and every person in that building was moving with the kind of deliberate, focused urgency that belongs to people who understand that the clock has changed. Derek Vaughn had given them 48 hours. They had decided not to need them. Carol Yuen arrived 20 minutes later with a canvas tote bag and a cardboard box and the expression of a woman who had made a decision she was not going to unmake. She set everything on the counter without being asked and started pulling out folders. The payment records were organized. Carol was a baker, which meant she understood precision, which meant every receipt, every wire transfer confirmation, every document with Halcyon Properties printed across the top had been filed in date order going back 18 months. Garrett took one look at it and said, "This is beautiful," in the tone of a man who genuinely meant it. Carol looked at him. I kept records because I didn't trust them, she said. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I kept everything. That habit just became the most important thing that's happened today, he said, and he was not exaggerating. While Garrett worked his way through Carol's files, the two women with the laptops had pulled up the county recorder's database and were cross-referencing property transactions in Silver Creek against the names that had come up Halcyon Properties. Gregory Taft, Patricia Holt's Chamber of Commerce letterhead. What they were finding was not subtle once you knew what to look for. 3 commercial properties had transferred out of their original owners' names in the last 2 years under circumstances that, examined individually, looked like ordinary sales. but laid side by side against the pattern they were building, looked like something else entirely. Something that had the architecture of a plan. Maya was at the desk in the back office with her phone and the notary stamp she'd photographed, and she was calling every licensed notary database she could find that was publicly accessible. She was looking for a name, Ease. She hadn't found it yet, Ease. But she was going to Ease because the stamp was registered, Ease, and registered things left trails, Ease, and she was very good at following trails. That was a skill she had developed in a different life, in a different kind of survival, and she had never been more grateful for it than right now. Jackson came in from outside and stood in the doorway of the back office. "Ease, we have a problem," he said. She looked up from her phone. "One of the riders just picked up a police scanner," he said. "Ease, there's a call in. Someone reported an unlawful assembly at this address." Ease. Maya put her phone face down on the desk. "Derek." "Or Holt," Jackson said. "Or both. Doesn't matter who called. What matters is a patrol car is going to be here in about 20 minutes, and 230 motorcycles in front of a business with a noise complaint on file from 3 months ago." "Ease, we have noise complaints on file?" Maya said. "Filed 6 weeks after the contractor visited," Jackson said. "2 of them, both anonymous." She closed her eyes for 1 second. "Ease, the contractor, the Chamber of Commerce recommendation. Ease, Patricia Holt, feeding the system from the inside. Ease, using the ordinary trust infrastructure of a small-town noise complaints. Ease, contractor referrals. Ease, legal introductions as the mechanism of slow strangulation. Ease, it was so mundane that it was almost elegant. Almost. "How long can you hold the situation outside?" she asked. "Tommy's already handling it," Jackson said. "The riders aren't doing anything illegal. Ease, they're parked, they're talking. Technically, it's a public street." A pause. "But if the responding officer is on Vaughn's payroll." Is that possible?" Jackson looked at her steadily. "A man who has Patricia Holt running his information network for years. What do you think?" Ease. Maya picked her phone back up. "Then we move faster," she said. "How much do you need to be able to hand to a state-level investigator and have it hold up?" "Garrett says another hour," Jackson said. "Maybe 90 minutes. "Then we have 90 minutes, Maya said, "and we use every second." She was already dialing before he left the doorway. The patrol car arrived in 17 minutes, which was faster than they'd said, and told her something about motivation. Officer Danny Reeves stepped out of it and stood on the street, outside, looking at 230 parked motorcycles with an expression that cycled through several stages before settling on something professionally cautious. He was 32 years old, and he had the careful, guarded look of a man who has learned that situations in this town sometimes have layers he isn't supposed to see, and that the safest policy is to handle what's in front of him and not pull on threads. Tommy Briggs met him at the perimeter. Maya watched from inside. She couldn't hear what Tommy said, but she watched the body language. Tommy standing easy, unhurried, not aggressive, not deferential either, just present, just calm. Just the particular quality of a man who is not intimidated but has no interest in creating a confrontation. She watched Officer Reeves's posture change from braced for resistance to something more careful, more listening. Tommy handed him a card. Reeves looked at it. Tommy spoke for another 30 seconds. Reeves looked at the card again. Looked at the shop. Looked at Tommy. Put the card in his breast pocket. And walked back to his car. He sat inside it for 4 minutes without moving. And during those 4 minutes, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. Then he pulled out and drove slowly down the street and turned the corner and was gone. Jackson appeared at Maya's shoulder. "What did Tommy tell him?" "I have no idea," she said. "I'll ask." He went outside. Maya watched through the window as he crossed to Tommy, who spoke for about 15 seconds. Jackson's expression as he came back told her the conversation had been interesting. He told Reeves that the situation involved potential criminal activity at this address, Jackson said, and that a complaint had already been filed with the state attorney general's office, and that any officer who interfered with witnesses at this location while that complaint was active would be placing themselves in a complicated legal position. Maya stared at him. "Have we actually filed with the state attorney general?" "No," Jackson said, "we have not. Tommy just lied to a police officer." Tommy, Jackson said carefully, told an officer something that was going to be true within the next few hours and suggested it was already true. That's not lying. That's optimistic timing. Despite everything, Despite the documents in the scanner and the 17-minute patrol car and the weight of everything pressing down on this building tonight, Maya laughed. Ease. It was short and surprised and real, and Jackson looked at her with something in his eyes that was both relief and the particular warmth of a man who is glad that the person beside him has not lost herself in all of this. Is 90 minutes, she said, and went back to the desk. It was Garrett who found the thread that unraveled everything. He found it at 11:14 at night, which was 3 hours into what should have been a 90-minute job, but had expanded the way serious things always do when they're bigger than anyone initially understood. The shop was still full, riders coming in and out. Carol on the phone with the Rivera family. Two more business owners Maya had never met before tonight, sitting in the showroom, going through their own files with the focused desperation of people who have been afraid for too long and are now directing that energy somewhere it can actually do something. Garrett called Jackson and Maya into the back office, and he had printed from what printer Maya didn't know, but he had found one somewhere, a single spreadsheet. These 32 rows. Each row was a business name, a date, an amount, and a series of transaction codes. I pulled this from the state's corporate disclosure database, Garrett said. It took me a while because it's structured to discourage exactly what I was doing, but the information is technically public, which means it's technically there if you know what you're looking for. Jackson looked at the spreadsheet. What am I looking at? Halcyon Properties has filed annual reports for 7 years, Garrett said. 7 years, Jackson. This didn't start recently. It's been running this entire time. And this, he pointed to the column of transaction codes. This is the revenue stream. 32 businesses over 7 years. Some sold outright. Some in payment arrangements like Carol's. Some with the loan refinancing mechanism like Ann Briggs. Different structures, same origin, same destination. Maya traced a finger down the business names. She didn't recognize all of them, but she recognized enough. The hardware store DeLuca's family had run for 3 generations. A diner on Route 9 that had closed 2 years ago. She remembered thinking at the time that it seemed sudden, that the place had always been busy, that the closure didn't make sense. A veterinary practice on the north side of town. 32 businesses, she said quietly. In Silver Creek and the 3 surrounding towns, Garrett said. The network isn't just here. He's been running the same operation in Millhaven, in Crestwood, in Dalton Falls. Each time using local infrastructure, a Chamber of Commerce contact, a compliant attorney, an insider who can route vulnerable businesses toward him. Jackson put his hand flat on the desk. He didn't slam it. He just set it down, slowly, with the measured control of a man who is feeling something very large and choosing not to let it run ahead of him. 32 families, he said. At minimum, Garrett said. I haven't finished cross-referencing. There may be more. The room was very still for a moment. We need to go tonight, Maya said. Not tomorrow, not in 48 hours, tonight. Agreed, Tommy said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. He was looking at the spreadsheet over Jackson's shoulder. But we need to choose where we go. State Attorney General's office has a criminal division. We can reach the duty investigator tonight if we have enough to justify it. We have enough, Garrett said. Then I need another hour with this, Maya said. I need the notary name. If I can get the notary name, I can tie the forged documents directly to a specific licensed professional, and that's the physical bridge between the paperwork and the people who created it. Without it, we have a pattern. With it, we have a chain. You've been running the notary search for 3 hours, Jackson said. It wasn't a criticism. It was the gentlest possible version of concern. I'm close, she said. The stamp is from a notary whose license was issued in Larimer County 7 years ago. The database has a gap in it between years 4 and 5, which means someone either made an error in the filing system or someone with access to the database had a reason to create that gap. I'm working around it. Tommy and Jackson looked at each other. How do you know how to do this? Tommy asked her. Maya kept her eyes on her screen. I've had reasons in my life to learn how public record systems work, she said. How information gets hidden and how to find it anyway. A pause. It's a long story. Tommy said nothing to that. He looked at Jackson with an expression that carried some understanding Maya wasn't party to, some recognition of the fact that people who have survived difficult things develop particular competencies, and that those competencies tend to show up exactly when they're needed. 1 hour, Tommy said. Then we go regardless. The call that came in at 11:47 was from a number Maya didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. Ease. 30 seconds later, she listened to the message. Ease. And then she played it again. Ease. And then she walked out of the back office and into the showroom and said, "Ease," very calmly, "Jackson, I need everyone to hear this." It took 90 seconds for the room to get quiet enough. Then she held up her phone and played the message on speaker. The voice on the recording was male, older, with a particular quality of someone speaking quietly and quickly in the awareness that he shouldn't be making this call at all. "Ease. My name is Robert Chen. I'm an attorney licensed in the state of Colorado. I worked for Derek Vaughn's organization for 2 years, ending 14 months ago under what I believed at the time was a standard corporate practice arrangement. Ease. I am calling this number because I was given it by a former client who told me to call if I ever decided to stop being afraid." A pause. A breath. "I have documentation, internal memos, correspondence, specific instructions regarding the notarization process for documents placed in target business files. I have the notary's name. I have email chains. I have enough to put a significant number of people in a very serious legal situation." Another pause. Longer this time. "I left that organization because I wasn't able to make myself keep doing what I was being asked to do. Ease. I should have come forward sooner. I know that. But I'm ready now." The message ended. Ease. The room was silent. Then Carol Yun said softly, "Who gave him this number?" Maya lowered the phone. She looked at Jackson. He was looking at her with an expression that told her he didn't know the answer to that either, and that he found the not knowing significant. "Someone who knew this was going to happen," Tommy said from across the room. He said it without drama, without any theatrical weight, just as a plain statement of fact. "Someone who's been watching this situation for longer than tonight." Jackson turned and looked at Tommy directly. Tommy met his eyes. "Ease. I put certain people on notice about 6 months ago," he said, "when the pattern around Silver Creek started to become visible. I didn't know when it would break, but I knew when it did, we needed to be ready. Robert Chen was one of 3 people I identified as potential pressure points, someone with inside knowledge and a conscience that hadn't been fully switched off yet." He paused. "I didn't know he had documentation. And here Tommy Briggs did something Maya had not seen him do once in the hours since he'd walked through this door." He smiled. Fully, genuinely. "That's better than I expected." "You've been preparing for this," Jackson said, not angry, more like a man recalibrating something inside himself. "Ease. For how long?" "Long enough," Tommy said. "You walked away, Jackson. That doesn't mean we stopped watching out for you." The silence that followed that statement had a texture to it, something that Maya felt even as an outsider to it, even as someone who had only known Jackson Reed as a mechanic and a shop owner, and increasingly over the course of this night, as something more layered and remarkable than either of those things. Ease. She felt the specific quality of 22 years collapsing into a single moment, of a man understanding that the silence he thought had been separation had actually been something else, something that looked a lot more like vigil. Jackson's jaw worked once. He didn't say anything, but he nodded, and the nod was enough. "Call Chen back," Maya said, because someone had to move them forward, and she was getting very good at being that person. "Tell him we need everything he has digitally transferred to a secure location in the next 2 hours. "He's Garrett. I have a secure email set up," Garrett said. He was already writing down an address on a sticky note. "Tell Chen to use that address," Maya said. "And tell him." She paused, and she chose her next words carefully because they mattered. "Tell him what he did tonight took courage. He should know that." Tommy passed the sticky note to one of the riders who stepped outside to make the call. Maya turned back to her screen. She turned back to the notary database, to the gap between years 4 and 5, to the work that still needed to be done. And as she did, as she settled back into the focused, patient work of following information through the places it had been hidden, she became aware of something in her own chest, a heat, a certainty, that had not been there this morning. When she'd come in early and sorted the reservation folders and listened to the rain on the roof and thought that the day would be ordinary. She was not afraid. She had been afraid for so much of her life. She had been afraid in ways that the people around her right now couldn't see and that she had never fully explained to anyone. The kind of fear that comes from being in situations where your safety depended on the goodwill of people who could withdraw it at any moment. She knew that fear like she knew her own reflection. She knew its weight and its texture, and the particular way it sat in the body, the tightness behind the sternum, the heightened awareness that never quite relaxes, The perpetual calculations of who in a room is a threat and how quickly an exit can be reached. She was not feeling that right now. Right now, she felt something she had only learned to access in the last 3 years slowly, carefully. In the particular safety of this shop, and this town, and this man who had hired her without asking too many questions and treated her with a consistency of respect that she had had to consciously teach herself to believe was real. She felt like herself, her full, capable, undefended self. She found the notary at 12:23 in the morning. She found her through a workaround that involved 3 separate database queries, a cross-reference with the state licensing board's annual compliance reports, and the entirely accidental discovery that the gap in the Larimer County records had not actually been erased. It had been filed under a different administrative category, which meant it existed, intact, waiting, is in a place where someone who knew to look for it in the wrong place would find it in the right one. The notary's name was Sandra Pruitt. She was 56 years old. Licensed for 23 years. With a clean record until year 16. When a complaint had been filed against her by a client. And then, 6 weeks later, withdrawn. The withdrawal was contemporaneous with a property transaction in her name, a house she could not on the record have afforded at the time. Maya photographed everything. She sent it to Garrett. She stood up from the desk and walked through the service bay and into the showroom, and she said with her voice completely level, "I have the notary." The effect on the room was immediate. The 2 women at the laptops both looked up. Garrett, who was still cross-referencing Carol's payment records, stood up from where he'd been sitting. Tommy Briggs came in from the front door, where he'd been standing with 2 of the riders. Jackson was already looking at her, Sandra Pruitt, Maya said. Licensed notary. Her stamp appears on every forged document we've found. She has a financial history that connects to a property purchase that doesn't make sense on her recorded income. Time to the withdrawal of a professional complaint against her. She looked at Garrett. When Chen's files come through, check for her name. If her name appears in the internal memos, we have a direct line from the documents to the people who ordered them, Garrett said. Yes. Can you get that to the state attorney general tonight? Maya said to Tommy. The duty investigator is already expecting our call, Tommy said. I reached out 40 minutes ago. He's waiting. Maya looked at him. How did you know we'd be ready in time? Because you were the one doing it, Tommy said simply, as if that answered everything. And the strange thing was, standing there at 12:24 in the morning with a folder of photographs on her phone and the name of a notary that connected a businessman's criminal enterprise to the paper trail that dismantled it, it almost did. They placed the call to the duty investigator at 12:41. Garrett handled the technical presentation. The man had a gift for compressing complex information into sequential logic that moved quickly and left no gaps, while Tommy laid out the structural overview, and Maya fielded the specific questions. About the documents she'd found and the database work she'd done on the notary stamp. The investigator's name was Marcus Webb. He was 50 years old, career state criminal division, with the particular cadence of a man who has heard many things that were supposed to surprise him and has learned not to let that show. He listened for 22 minutes without interrupting, which was itself a signal. A man who doesn't interrupt a presentation that long is a man who is hearing something that justifies the time. When Garrett finished, Webb was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. How many businesses total? He said. 32 confirmed, Garrett said. He's potentially more across Millhaven, Crestwood, and Dalton Falls. And you have the corporate disclosure records from the state database. Printed and photographed, Garrett said. The Chen Materials has everything transferred? Maya checked her phone. She had received a notification from the secure email Garrett had set up. Yes, she said. 23 files, documents, email chains, 2 audio recordings. Audio recordings, Webb repeated, with a quality in his voice that was the closest thing to audible interest she'd heard from him. I don't know what's on them, Maya said. They came with the email. We haven't listened yet, don't, Webb said. Don't listen, don't alter, don't forward. That chain of custody matters. A pause. And the individual who provided those recordings, Robert Chen, he's willing to speak with us. That's his intent, Tommy said. Another pause. Long. The kind that means a decision is being made, and the person making it is doing so carefully because they understand the weight of it. I'm going to make 2 calls, Webb said. The first is to my division chief because this is above my unilateral authority to move on tonight. The second is to the county sheriff, specifically not the Silver Creek PD, for reasons I think you can infer. A beat. I want everyone at that location to stay put. Do not contact Derek Vaughn, Patricia Holt, or Sandra Pruitt. Do not contact any local law enforcement. Can you do that? Yes, Tommy said. I'll call you back in 30 minutes, Webb said. He hung up. Then breathed. Maya sat down on the edge of the desk. She put her phone face down on the surface beside her, and she pressed her palms flat on her thighs, and she let herself feel for 3 seconds the full weight of what the last 7 hours had been. The documents. The notary stamp. The scanner picking up the patrol car call. Tommy's optimistic timing with Officer Reeves. Carol Yoon walking in with her canvas tote and her 18 months of careful records. Robert Chen's voice on a message from a number she didn't recognize saying, "I'm ready now." 3 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and looked at Jackson. While we wait, she said, "I want to know about Patricia Holt." Jackson looked at her steadily. He pulled a chair over and sat down in a way that told her this was going to be a longer conversation than the simple operational information she'd asked for. She came to Silver Creek about 5 years ago, he said. Before that, she was director of a chamber of commerce in Millhaven. Maya went very still. Millhaven, she said, one of the towns Garrett found in the disclosure records. Yes, Jackson said. She ran the chamber in Millhaven for 4 years. Left under not scandal, exactly. The way she left was too smooth for it to be scandal. It was more like she had completed what she was there to do and moved to the next location. She moved with him, Maya said. She's not just an accomplice. She's not someone he corrupted along the way. She's part of the operation from the beginning, Jackson said. Yes, Maya absorbed that. She thought about every interaction she'd ever had with Patricia Holt, the woman at the chamber mixer, when Maya had first started working for Jackson. The one who had shaken her hand and said, "Silver Creek is such a wonderful community." The one who had been warm and professional and available whenever local businesses needed resources or recommendations. The one who had been, this entire time, the most efficient predator in the room. She knew about me, Maya said. She would have known. If she was routing vulnerable business owners toward Vaughn, she would have vetted the employees of the target businesses, Jackson said quietly. Yes, she knew my history, probably. Maya felt something move through her that she could only describe as a cold, clarifying anger, not the hot kind that makes you irrational, but the kind that sharpens everything, that makes the edges of things very clear. She had been assessed as a vulnerability. A young woman with a difficult past, working for an isolated shop owner, someone whose loyalty could be leveraged or whose fear could be exploited if the first approach failed. She had been calculated as a weakness in Jackson's defense. She looked at the stack of documents on the desk, at Carol's payment records, at Garrett's spreadsheet with its 32 rows, at the photographs of the notary stamp and the database records and the chain of evidence that she had spent 7 hours building with her own hands. How does it feel, she said to no one in particular, to have miscalculated that badly? Tommy Briggs, from the doorway said, In my experience, men like Derek Vaughn underestimate people in difficult situations because they assume that difficulty produces weakness. They never consider that it might produce something else entirely. Nobody disagreed with that. They waited for Marcus Webb's call. It came in 27 minutes, not 30, which was another signal. I spoke with my division chief, Webb said, and his voice had changed in a way that was small but unmistakable, the slightly heightened control of a man who has just been given authorization and is now operating in official capacity. We're moving on this tonight. I need the physical documents secured at your location. We're sending 2 investigators and a county sheriff's unit. Estimated arrival 45 minutes. A pause. One more thing. Yes, Tommy said, the audio recordings Chen provided. My division chief listened to the first 30 seconds of one of them before I told him not to. He told me. Webb paused again. And in the pause, Maya could feel him deciding how much to say. He told me that Derek Vaughn's voice is identifiable on that recording discussing, in explicit terms, the specific mechanism of document planting in a named target business. Another pause. The business named in the recording is not Reed Cycles and Rentals. What business? Jackson said. The Rivera Family Auto Body Shop, Webb said. The recording appears to be from approximately 10 months ago. If it's authentic and unaltered, It constitutes direct evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. This is no longer a civil matter. The room was absolutely still. 45 minutes, Tommy said. 45 minutes, Webb confirmed. Don't move those documents. He ended the call. In the showroom. Through the front window. The street was still full of parked bikes, and the night was very deep now. Past 1 in the morning, and the town of Silver Creek was quiet in the way that small towns get quiet when most people are asleep and have no idea what is being built or dismantled in their midst. Carol Yoon was sitting in a chair by the counter with her hands folded in her lap, and she had the expression of someone who is trying to contain something large. Jackson Reed was standing with his arms crossed and his eyes on the middle distance, in the particular posture of a man who has been waiting for something for a very long time and is trying to make himself believe it has finally arrived. And Maya Collins was at the desk in the back office. Not working now. Just sitting with the spreadsheet and the documents and the photographs arranged in front of her. She was thinking about 32 businesses, about Frank DeLuca's 3 generations of family hardware, about Ann Briggs fighting her bank alone, about the diner on Route 9 that had always been busy, that had closed suddenly 2 years ago, and that she had walked past afterward and thought that it seemed wrong. Is the way something that has been part of a place for a long time leaves a shape in the air when it disappears. She was thinking about what it costs when people are made to disappear quietly, when they are isolated and pressured and made to feel that resistance is irrational, that the only sane response is compliance, that nobody is coming. She was thinking about what it means when that turns out to be wrong. Outside in the street, 230 men who had come because one man had finally asked were waiting with the patience of people who understand that the most important moments are the ones that require you to hold your position and not move until the time is exactly right. 45 minutes. They had come this far. The 45 minutes felt like 4 hours and like 4 minutes at the same time, the way time does when you are waiting for something that cannot be rushed and that you cannot stop thinking about. Maya stayed at the desk. She didn't try to do more work because there was nothing more she could do that wouldn't risk contaminating what they had, and Marcus Webb had been very clear about chain of custody. So she sat. She organized what was already organized. She looked at Sandra Pruitt's name, written in her own handwriting on a yellow legal pad, and she thought about the 23 years of a clean professional record and the moment when that record had bent, the property transaction, the withdrawn complaint, the quiet way a person slides from one version of themselves into another when the money is right and the fear of consequences hasn't caught up yet. She thought about choices, about the specific moment before a choice when the weight of what you're about to do is still fully visible and you make it anyway. Carol came to the doorway of the back office. She leaned against the frame and looked at Maya with the tired, steady expression of someone who has been through something and is still going through it and has decided that the best available posture is simply to keep standing. Can I ask you something? Carol said. Yes, Maya said. How did you know to keep looking? In the filing cabinets, when Jackson told you to. You went straight to it. Most people would have been too shaken up to think clearly after what happened this morning. Maya considered the question. She looked at her hands on the desk. I've been in situations where the only thing that helped was information, she said. Where knowing more about what was actually happening was the only thing between me and something worse. You get trained by experience. You learn that the answer is usually in the thing you haven't looked at yet. A pause. And honestly, I was angry. Anger is useful if you know how to aim it. Carol was quiet for a moment. Where did you come from before here? Before Jackson hired you? Somewhere. I'm glad I left, Maya said. It was not an evasion. It was the most accurate answer she had. Carol nodded. She looked down at her hands and then back up. Derek Vaughn came to my bakery wearing the same expression he wore in here this morning. Like he was doing me a favor. Like I should be grateful that he'd noticed me at all. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not entirely. I signed his document because I was afraid of what would happen to my business if I didn't, and because Patricia Holt had spent 6 months making herself my trusted advisor, and because when you've been running a small business alone for 12 years, the isolation is real. It wears on you, and he counted on that. He counted on everyone's isolation, Maya said. That was the whole system. Keep people separated. Make each person believe they're the only one dealing with it, that there's no pattern, that resistance is pointless. The moment that stops being true, the whole thing falls apart, Carol said. Yes, Carol looked at her for a long moment. You're 24 years old, she said. It wasn't a criticism. It was more like wonder. Sometimes, Maya said, that's exactly the right age to be angry enough to do something about it. The investigators arrived in 43 minutes, not 45. Two of them in unmarked vehicles, followed by a county sheriff's unit, not Silver Creek PD, exactly as Webb had specified. The two investigators were a man named Dylan and a woman named Carver, and they moved through the shop with the efficient, unhurried precision of people who know exactly what they're doing and are not interested in theatrics. They had credentials, and they showed them without being asked. He's to Jackson first, then to Tommy, then to Maya when she came out of the back office. Carver looked at the layout of documents Maya had organized on the desk and spent approximately 90 seconds reviewing them without touching anything. Then she looked at Maya. You did this? She said. With help, Maya said. Garrett indexed everything. The photographs are on my phone, time-stamped and unaltered. The notary records came from the State Licensing Board database, cross-referenced through the county compliance filings. You found the gap in the Larimer County records, Dylan said, not as a question. He was looking at the legal pad where Maya had traced her search path in notes. Someone created it, Maya said, or thought they did. The data was just miscategorized. Dylan and Carver exchanged a look that Maya could not entirely read, but that had the quality of two people silently agreeing on something. The Chen materials, Carver said. The secure email. Garrett stepped forward. Within 12 minutes, he had walked the investigators through the complete digital transfer, the 23 files, the email metadata, the chain of custody documentation he had been building in real time through the entire process. Carver listened with a focused attention that missed nothing, stopping Garrett 3 times with specific technical questions that told Maya she was dealing with someone who genuinely understood the material. When Garrett finished, Carver turned to Dylan and said, in a tone that was flat and professional, and nonetheless managed to carry a significant weight, we have enough for tonight. Dylan was already on his phone. Tommy Briggs came in from the showroom. What does tonight look like? He said to Carver directly, because Tommy had learned many things in many decades, and one of them was that the most efficient communication is always direct. Carver looked at him. She was measuring something, not him personally. But the situation. The balance of what she could say and what she couldn't. The weight of an active investigation against the reality that this man and the 230 people outside had made this moment possible and deserved something more than a procedural brush-off. Tonight, she said, we take possession of the physical documents and the digital evidence. We have investigators en route to 3 additional locations. We have authorization to move on several individuals. She paused. The audio recordings Mr. Chen provided are being reviewed by my division chief right now. If they hold up, and preliminary assessment suggests the scope of this becomes significantly larger than a civil fraud matter. Derek Vaughn, Jackson said from the doorway. He said the name with the complete, quiet neutrality of a man who has been waiting all night to ask the question attached to it. Tonight, Carver looked at him. Mr. Reed, I can't give you a timeline. I'm not asking for a timeline, Jackson said. I'm asking if what we built tonight is enough. Carver held his gaze, and in the silence before she answered, Maya watched her make a decision, not a procedural one, but a human one. The decision to give a man who had spent 7 hours helping build something the one piece of honest information he actually needed. Carver said, it's enough. Jackson nodded once. He looked at the floor for a moment and then back up. And in his expression, Maya saw something release, not relief exactly. Because relief suggests the danger was temporary, and this had not been temporary. This had been 7 hours of sustained, focused, determined work built on 3 years of a life this man had made in this town and 14 years of a business that had been his reason to stay quiet and be ordinary and stop being the person he used to be. It was something deeper than relief. It was something closer to completion. Then do your work, he said to Carver. We'll stay out of your way. What happened in the next 2 hours was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was methodical and careful and entirely unglamorous, and it was, for exactly that reason, the most powerful thing Maya had ever witnessed. Carver and Dylan worked through the physical documents one by one, photographing each with a professional camera, noting the chain of custody in a formal log. bagging certain originals in evidence envelopes with the particular deliberate care that meant they were going somewhere they could not be challenged. They interviewed Garrett about the database work. They interviewed Maya for 40 minutes about the notary search, asking her to walk through each step of the process in sequence so that every element of how the information had been found was documented and reproducible. During Maya's interview, Dylan asked her once, very casually, as if it were an afterthought, the gap in the Larimer County database. How did you know to look in the miscategorized administrative filings? Maya looked at him. I've dealt with systems that hide things before, she said. You get a sense for where things go when they're moved, rather than deleted. Dylan wrote something in his notebook. He moved on to the next question. But Maya noticed that what he'd written seemed longer than a single note, and she filed that away without comment. Outside, the night had gotten very quiet. The riders were still there, they were not going anywhere, but the energy had shifted from tense and purposeful to something more settled. People were sitting on their bikes, talking in low voices. A few had found coffee from somewhere. Tommy had been in and out of the shop half a dozen times, managing the outside with the same quiet authority he managed everything. At one point, Maya looked through the window and saw him standing with a group of 6 or 7 riders, and whatever he was telling them had them nodding with the specific attention of people receiving information that matters. She turned back to Dylan's next question. At 3:17 in the morning, Carver stepped out of the back office and found Jackson in the showroom and said, "We need Carol Yoon in here. Her payment records are the cleanest documentary evidence of an ongoing financial relationship with Halcyon Properties. We want her formal statement tonight." Carol, who was sitting in the same chair she'd been in for 2 hours, stood up immediately. She looked at Maya as she moved toward the back office. "You'll be fine," Maya said. "Just tell them what happened." "He's in order. Everything." Carol looked at her with something that was the compressed, complicated version of what she'd said earlier in the doorway about the isolation. He's about signing because she was afraid. He's about Patricia Holt's 6 months of carefully constructed trust. She looked at Maya the way people look at the specific person who opened the door they didn't believe was there. Then she squared her shoulders and walked into the back office. It was at that moment, precisely that moment, while Carol walked into the back, and Maya stood alone in the showroom, and the investigators worked, and Tommy's riders waited, and the night pressed its full weight down on Silver Creek, that Maya's phone rang. The number was blocked. She stared at it for 2 full rings. Then she picked up Miss Collins. The voice was Derek Vaughn's. Unhurried, controlled. He's the voice of a man who believed still. In this moment, that control was something he possessed. "I understand things have been busy at the shop tonight." Maya's heart rate did not change. She was aware of it not changing, in the same way she was aware of her own breathing and the weight of the phone in her hand, and she filed the awareness away and kept her voice completely level. "Mr. Vaughn," she said. "It's past 3 in the morning." "I'm aware of the hour," he said. "I'm also aware that you've had visitors this evening." "Official visitors. You should probably not be calling me right now," Maya said. "I'm going to give you one opportunity," Vaughn said. And the pleasant surface of his voice had thinned enough that the thing underneath was more visible now. "Whatever you think you've found, whatever you've handed to whoever came tonight, it's not what you think it is. The documentation you found in Jackson's files is legitimate. Every signature is authentic. Every agreement was entered into voluntarily. Any alternative narrative you've constructed is going to fall apart the moment my attorneys begin working through it. And when it does, the question of who wasted a state investigator's time on a manufactured complaint becomes a very uncomfortable one." Maya let him finish. She gave it a full 3 seconds of silence after he stopped speaking. "Mr. Vaughn," she said, "you just called a potential witness in an active state criminal investigation at 3 in the morning on a block number, which I'm sure your attorneys are going to have a fascinating time explaining." She paused. "I'm going to hang up now. I'd suggest not calling back." She hung up. She stood with the phone in her hand and she breathed for a moment. Steadily. The way you breathe when your body needs you to be calm, and you have learned, through practice, that you can actually make yourself be calm if you approach it deliberately enough. Then she walked to the back office door and knocked twice and said, "Carver, I just received a phone call I think you need to know about." Carver appeared in the doorway, Maya told her. Carver's expression as she listened was completely professional, and entirely opaque, right up until Maya said block number, at which point something shifted in it that Maya thought might have been satisfactory, though it was careful and controlled enough that she couldn't be certain. Yes, your phone is on a standard carrier, Carver said. Yes, don't delete that call log entry. Don't adjust any settings. Carver turned back into the office. Dylan, we need to add a witness tampering element to the documentation. Maya heard Dylan say from somewhere inside, of course we do. She went back to the showroom. The twist that nobody saw coming arrived at 4:08 in the morning in the form of a county sheriff's deputy who came through the front door with an expression that said he had information and was trying to decide how to deliver it. He found Tommy Briggs first, which was the right instinct, and he spoke to Tommy in a voice low enough that Maya couldn't hear the words, only the tone. Tone was the kind that carries news. Tommy's face didn't change. He thanked the deputy, turned, and found Jackson. Maya watched Jackson listen. She watched his jaw tighten and release. She watched him put one hand briefly on the counter, steadying himself against something, and then remove it. She crossed the room. What happened? Jackson looked at her. Patricia Holt, he said. She's been at the county sheriff's office for the last 2 hours. Maya went still. She turned herself in? No, Tommy said. She went there to file a complaint about us. About the assembly outside. About what she called unlawful interference with business operations. He paused. And in the pause, she heard something that was almost close to the edge of something he was working to keep controlled about Jackson specifically. She filed a formal statement claiming he organized a threatening demonstration against multiple Silver Creek business owners. The room processed this. Then Garrett, from the back office, said very calmly, she's trying to flip the narrative. Make herself a victim before she becomes a suspect. It won't work, Carver said, appearing in the back office doorway. We received notification about the filing 7 minutes ago. She walked into that sheriff's office without knowing what we've had in our possession for the last 3 hours. Her statement is going to look very different in the context of the evidence we've built. She looked at Tommy. But it does accelerate the timeline. How? Jackson said. Because now she's in an official location making official statements, Carver said, which means the window to move on the other individuals closes faster. If Vaughn has communicated with her in the last few hours, she stopped. She made a decision. We're moving now. Tonight. She looked at Dylan. Get Webb. Dylan was already on the phone. The next 12 minutes were organized chaos of the particular kind that happens when people who know what they're doing move fast. Carver and Dylan secured the remaining documents and logged the last items into evidence. 2 more investigators who Maya hadn't known were waiting arrived from vehicles parked down the block. The county sheriff's unit outside the shop received a radio transmission, and 2 of the deputies moved to their cars with the specific purposeful urgency that meant somewhere in Silver Creek, tonight, a door was about to be knocked on. Maya stood in the center of the showroom and watched it all happen and felt the strange, vertiginous quality of having been the engine of something you then have to step back from because it has become too large and too official for civilian hands. Tommy appeared beside her. You okay? Yes, she said. And then, because he had the kind of presence that made honesty feel both possible and necessary, I don't know what I'm feeling. I thought when this moment came, I'd feel I don't know. More certain about how it feels. That's because you've been in motion for 7 hours, Tommy said. When you've been moving that fast, towards something that matters that much, the feeling doesn't catch up until you stop. And you haven't stopped yet. She looked at him. When does it catch up? After, he said. Give it time. It always catches up. Jackson came to stand on her other side. The 3 of them stood together in the middle of the shop, watching the investigators finalize the last of their work. And outside through the window, the riders were still there. They were still there, 230 of them, in the deep hours of a Colorado night. And the sight of them, the sheer fact of them, did something to Maya's chest that she was not prepared for. Jackson, she said. Yeah, why did they come? All of them. Not just because you called. People don't mobilize 230 people on one phone call just out of obligation. Jackson was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was the particular kind of low that doesn't indicate sadness or weakness, but rather depth, the way certain things are said when they're coming from somewhere far down inside a person. Because 22 years ago, I was one of them, he said. Ease. And then I stopped being. Ease. And I thought if I left that world quietly enough, ease, didn't ask for anything, ease, didn't make demands on it, ease, the break would be clean. Ease, that I could just be ordinary, be a mechanic. He exhaled slowly. What I didn't understand was that it doesn't work that way. The people you've been through things with, the things you've stood for, you don't get to simply walk away from those things as if they didn't happen. They stay with you. They stay with the people who shared them. And when something happens that calls back to what those things were about, he gestured slightly at the window. At the street, there's no calculation. There's no weighing it up. They just come. Maya looked at the window. At the bikes and the riders and the night. What were those things about? She said. At the core. What was it always about? Jackson considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. Not letting people who use power against the powerless get away with it, he said. That's the simplified version. That's what's underneath everything else, under all the noise and the history and the things that went wrong along the way. Don't let it happen if you can stop it. He looked at her. That's why they came. Because what Vaughn was doing to this shop, to this town, it was exactly that. And they know what that looks like. Maya nodded slowly. She thought about the version of herself who had walked into this shop 3 years ago, careful, watchful, accustomed to making herself small and manageable, carrying a past that she had been told, in various ways and by various people, should make her grateful for whatever scraps of stability came her way. She thought about how Jackson had hired her without asking too many questions and treated her with steady, matter-of-fact respect and never once made her feel that her continued presence in his shop was conditional on her diminishment. She thought about what that had cost him to give, quietly, without fanfare, over 3 years. And she thought about what it had built in her, the confidence that had let her hold Derek Vaughn's gaze across the counter this morning. The clarity that had driven her to the filing cabinets when Jackson asked. The anger that had been precise and productive and had ultimately, tonight, been one of the primary instruments of dismantling a 7-year criminal enterprise. You hired me because you needed a clerk, she said. I hired you because I recognized something, Jackson said. I've known a lot of people who've been through difficult things. I know what it looks like when someone is carrying something heavy and still showing up anyway. I wanted to give you a place to show up to. Maya did not trust her voice for a moment. She let the moment be what it was, and then she said, carefully, that might not be the kindest anyone has ever done for me. It wasn't charity, he said. You were the best applicant. Also, you alphabetized the filing system in the first 2 weeks without being asked, and it had been a disaster for years. She laughed. It surprised her, the full, genuine kind of laugh that comes out of unexpected warmth in the middle of exhaustion. Tommy made a sound beside her that was either a cough or his version of the same thing. Carver came out of the back office at 4:51 with her jacket buttoned and her case bag over her shoulder and the completed expression of someone who has finished what they came to do. She stood in front of Jackson and she said, we're done here for tonight. I want to be clear that the investigation is ongoing and active. There will be follow-up. There will be formal interviews. There will be things that need documentation that we haven't gotten to yet. You should not speak to media. You should not discuss specifics with anyone outside this room until you hear from our office. Understood, Jackson said. The physical originals are secured. You'll receive formal receipts. The digital evidence has been transferred and logged. She paused. Mr. Reed. He's in 19 years in this division. I've had 3 cases that were built the way this one was built by civilians. In real time. Under pressure. Overnight. She looked at him and then at Maya. This was the most complete package I've received from non-investigators in my entire career. She said it the way people say things that are true and that they think deserve to be said plainly. Then she nodded, turned, and walked out. The door closed behind her. The shop was quiet. Jackson let out a breath that was long and slow and came from somewhere that had been holding it for hours. He put both hands on the counter and looked at the surface of it, at the scratches, and the worn grain and the 14 years of ordinary work that had happened here, and he was quiet for a long moment. Carol Yoon came out of the back office. She had been crying, Maya could tell, not from grief, but from the particular release that comes when something that has been pressing down on you for too long finally ease. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood straight and looked at the room with the expression of a woman who has decided something. "Please, I'm going to make coffee," she said. Real coffee, not whatever that was from the machine. She moved toward the small kitchen area off the service bay. "Please, somebody needs to eat something. It's almost 5 in the morning." Two of the riders, the women who'd been at the laptops all night, followed her without being asked. Garrett was at the desk in the back office, still. Maya looked in on him. He had his legal pad in front of him, and he was writing, filling in the last of his index entries, with the methodical care he'd brought to everything all night. "Please, Garrett," she said, "we're done." He looked up. He looked at the pad. He set down his pen. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to finish the record." He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has been trusted with something important and has treated that trust with everything he had. It's a complete index. Every document, every source, every chain of custody note, even the things the investigators took, there's a record of what they took and when. "Yes," Maya said. "We don't need it anymore. You always need the record," Garrett said. "Because the record is what proves it happened. What proves it was real." He picked up the pad and held it out to her. "Keep this." She took it. "Please." She stood in the doorway of the back office with Garrett's legal pad in her hands, and she looked at his handwriting, neat, precise. He's organized, covering page after page. And she thought about 32 businesses and 7 years, and the people who had been made to feel alone, and the woman who had spent 6 months building false trust, and the man who had sat across the counter from her that morning and told her with the calm authority of someone who had never been wrong about a thing in his life, that she was a weakness in someone else's armor. She thought about how wrong he had been. She thought about what the record said, what it would keep saying long after this night was over, and the investigation had run its course, and the decisions had been made in rooms she would never be in. The record said these people were here. These people showed up. These people built something in the dark, overnight, when they had every reason to believe it was impossible. She was still standing there when Jackson appeared beside her. "The riders are getting ready to head out," he said. "Tommy wants to say goodbye." Maya nodded. She set the legal pad carefully on the desk. She followed Jackson through the service bay and into the showroom and out the front door and into the early morning air, which was cold and clean and smelled like pine and pavement and the particular freshness that belongs to hours that most people never see. Tommy Briggs was standing near his bike. He looked at her when she came out, and his expression had the warmth of someone who is not given to sentiment and is feeling it anyway. "You did good work tonight," he said to her. "We all did," she said. "You did the kind of work that doesn't come from training," he said. "It comes from knowing, in your bones, what it costs when the wrong people win. You know that cost personally." He looked at her steadily. "That's why you were the right person to be in that shop this morning." Maya held his gaze. "I was just sorting folders," she said. Tommy smiled. It was the same full, genuine smile she had seen once before, when Garrett had described Carol's payment records as beautiful. "That's how it always starts," he said. He put his hand out, and she shook it. His grip was firm and brief and honest. Then he turned to Jackson, and the two men looked at each other for a long moment. In the thin, clear air of 5 in the morning, and what passed between them did not require words and did not get any ease. And that was exactly right. Tommy swung onto his bike. One by one, across the length of the street, engines came to life. Maya stood on the sidewalk in front of the shop and watched them go. She watched until the last taillight turned the corner at the far end of the block, until the sound had reduced itself to a low rumble, and then to something below the threshold of hearing, until the street was just a street again, ordinary and quiet and hers. The sky to the east had the faint, tentative brightness of a night that is about to end. Carol appeared in the doorway behind her with 2 cups of coffee. "Come inside," Carol said. "It's cold." Maya took the cup. She looked at the street for one more moment. She thought about Derek Vaughn, somewhere in Silver Creek right now, in a house that no longer felt as safe as it had yesterday morning. She thought about Patricia Holt at the sheriff's office, filing a complaint that had already been overtaken by the truth. She thought about Sandra Pruitt, who was going to get a very early morning knock on her door from people with credentials and questions she was not going to enjoy answering. She thought about 32 businesses, and the ones that might still be saved. She turned and went back inside. The shop smelled like coffee and motor oil, and the specific, irreplaceable smell of a place where something real had happened, where people had shown up and stayed and done the difficult thing rather than the easy one. Jackson was at the counter, both hands around a mug, looking at nothing in particular with the expression of a man at the end of a very long road who is not yet sure he believes he's arrived at the destination. Maya sat on the edge of the counter beside him. They drank their coffee in the quiet. Outside, Silver Creek was just beginning to wake up. The coffee went cold before either of them finished it. Neither of them noticed. They sat in the quiet of the shop as Silver Creek woke up around them the sound of a delivery trucks, somewhere 2 blocks over, a dog barking once and then stopping. The thin early light changing the quality of the air in the way that only happens in that particular hour when night finally admits it's finished. Carol had fallen asleep in the chair by the counter, her head tipped sideways, her hands still loosely wrapped around her empty mug. Ease. Garrett had left an hour ago after pressing the legal pad into Maya's hands one final time and saying, with the simple directness of a man who doesn't waste words, what you did tonight mattered. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Jackson hadn't moved from the counter. Maya hadn't moved from beside him. They had talked for a while not about Vaughn or documents or evidence chains, but about other things, quieter things. The way people talk when the crisis is past and what's left is just the truth of who they are to each other. He had told her about the person he'd lost, the one who had made him walk away from his old life. He'd said her name, which was something Maya understood was not a small thing, because she had worked for this man for 3 years and had never heard him say it before. Her name was Elise. He said it looking at the counter, not at Maya. And his voice did not break, but it did change. It got quieter by a specific degree, the way voices change when they're saying something they've carried a long time in silence. She believed that people could choose to be different, he said, that the life you'd lived didn't have to be the only life available to you. She believed it for me before I believed it for myself. He was quiet for a moment. When I lost her, I thought the only way to honor what she believed about me was to actually become it. Stop being who I was, become the version of myself she saw. You did, Maya said. I became a mechanic, he said. A shop owner, a man who fixed engines and kept to himself and didn't ask the world for much. That's not what I meant, Maya said. I meant you became someone other people could trust. Someone who gives people a reason to keep going. That's what she saw. That's what you became. Jackson looked at her then. He had the expression of a man who has just heard something that is exactly true and that he has needed to hear for longer than he could easily calculate. He didn't say anything, but he nodded, slowly, once. And that was enough. Marcus Webb called at 7:43 in the morning. Maya had her phone on the counter beside the cold coffee, and she picked it up on the first ring. Miss Collins. His voice was different from the duty investigator voice of the previous night, still professional, but with something warmer underneath it, the particular quality of a person delivering news they have been looking forward to delivering. I wanted to give you an update before the day gets complicated. Go ahead, she said. Derek Vaughn was taken into custody at 5:50 this morning, Webb said. His attorney was present and advised him not to speak, which he ignored, which is going to make our job significantly easier. A pause. Sandra Pruitt surrendered voluntarily at 6:15 after her attorney made contact with our office at 3 in the morning, which tells us she'd been watching the situation develop and knew what was coming. She is cooperating fully. Maya exhaled slowly. Patricia Holt? That, Webb said, is the part of this morning that I particularly wanted to tell you about. He paused again, and in the pause she could feel him choosing his words. Mrs. Holt spent approximately 2 hours at the county sheriff's office last night filing her complaint. During that time, she made several statements about Jackson Reed and about what she called an organized intimidation effort. She was recorded making those statements. She was subsequently informed at approximately 5:30 this morning of the scope of the investigation and the evidence already in our possession. A longer pause. Her attorney arrived 12 minutes later. She has not made a voluntary statement since. She thought she was ahead of it, Maya said. She thought she was ahead of it, Webb confirmed. She was, in fact, approximately 7 hours behind it. Something in his voice that was not quite humor but was adjacent to it. Her statements last night, made before she understood the evidentiary situation, are part of the record now. She said some very clarifying things about her relationship with Halcyon Properties while she still believed she was the one filing the complaint. Maya sat with that for a moment. She thought about Patricia Holt at the Chamber of Commerce mixer 3 years ago. Ease. Warm and professional and available. Ease. Steering people toward Gregory Taft. Ease. Routing vulnerable business owners toward a machine that would eat them quietly. Ease. She thought about the contractor with the friendly manner who had spent time in his shop 8 months ago, commenting on the vintage manuals above the filing cabinet while his hands were elsewhere. How many of the 32 businesses can be helped? Maya said. The ones that are still operating, the ones still in payment arrangements. Yes. That's going to take time to work through, Webb said. But I'll tell you this, the evidentiary base you built last night is sufficient to challenge every agreement Halcyon Properties entered into under fraudulent representation. Everyone. It doesn't mean the process is fast. It doesn't mean it's painless. But it means there's a path. There's a path, Maya repeated. Yes, Webb said, there's a path. After she hung up, she held the phone in her hand and looked at Jackson and told him. Ease. She told him all of it. Ease. She watched his face through the telling. Ease. Watched the specific progression of it, the tightening when she said Vaughn was in custody. Ease. The stillness when she said Pruitt was cooperating. The thing that moved through his eyes when she got to Patricia Holt's 2 hours at the sheriff's office, saying clarifying things, while she still believed she was ahead of the story. Ease. When Maya finished, Jackson set down his cold coffee. Ease. He was quiet for a long moment. 32 businesses, he said finally. And we almost weren't one of the people who fought back. But you did fight back, Maya said. You fought back, he said. Ease. I made a phone call. You went to the filing cabinets. Ease. You hired me, Maya said. You gave me a place to stand. She looked at him steadily. That's where all of it started. Don't make it smaller than it is. Ease. Carol woke up then, not gradually. Ease. The way most people wake. Ease. But all at once. Ease. With the slightly startled alertness of someone whose body knows something important is happening even in sleep. She looked at Maya. She looked at Jackson. She read their faces the way people read faces when they've been through something together and have learned each other's specific emotional language. Ease. It's done, she said. It started, Maya said, which is the important part. Carol closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were bright in a way that had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with something like dawn, the specific internal brightness of a person who has been in the dark for a long time. Ease. And has finally seen the light come back. I need to open my bakery, she said. I haven't missed an opening in 12 years and I'm not starting today. She stood up. She collected herself with the particular efficiency of a woman who has work to do and knows it. She looked at Maya and then at Jackson and she said, with a simplicity that carried everything, thank you. Then she picked up her coat and walked out. Ease. Through the window, Maya watched her go. Ease. Carol Yoon. Ease. Walking down the sidewalk in the early morning light, ease, shoulders back, with the specific carriage of a person who has put down something they've been carrying for too long. Ease. The next 3 days were not quiet. They were not supposed to be. Webb's team came back twice for follow-up interviews. Ease. Formal statements were recorded from Maya, from Jackson, from Garrett, who drove back from Denver specifically to give his. The Rivera family's attorney made contact with the State Investigative Division, and within 48 hours, the financial arrangement that had been draining their business for 11 months was formally under challenge. Ann Briggs, who had been fighting her bank alone about a loan she didn't recognize, received a call from an attorney in Webb's division explaining that the refinancing of her property had been executed under forged documentation and that the entire transaction was under investigation. Maya spoke to Ann Briggs herself on the second day. Ann was 63 years old and had the voice of someone who had been fighting something complicated and exhausting for so long that she had begun to doubt her own memory of the time before it. She cried on the phone. Not dramatically, she cried the way people cry when they've been strong for too long and have finally been given permission to stop. I thought I must have misunderstood something, Ann said. Ease. I thought I keep a careful business, I always have. Ease. I know what I sign, but they made me feel like I was confused, like I'd forgotten. And when that happens long enough, you start to... You weren't confused, Maya said. You never misunderstood anything. They were very good at making people feel that way. Ease. That was the whole mechanism. How do you know all this? Ann said. Because I found the documents that prove it, Maya said. And because the same thing was happening to us. And we got lucky. And now we're going to do everything we can to make sure that luck extends as far as it can reach. Ann was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Who are you exactly? Jackson Reed's employee. Maya looked at the shop around her, at the counter, at the key rack, at the reservation folders she'd been sorting when the bell above the door rang 3 mornings ago and changed everything. I'm his partner, she said. And the word, which had not been formalized yet, which had not been spoken aloud between her and Jackson in any official sense, settled into the air, with the completeness of something that was already true and simply needed to be said. She heard Jackson from the service bay, where he'd been all morning, the sound of a wrench and an engine and ordinary work resuming its ordinary rhythm. She thought about the word partner and what it meant, and how long it had taken her to understand that it was something she could be, that belonging somewhere was not a temporary condition, that trust was not always a trap, that the right person giving you a place to stand could change what you were capable of becoming. The first real twist of the aftermath came on day 4. Robert Chen called her directly. Not through Tommy's network, not through Webb's office directly. On the number she'd picked up at 3 in the morning when the block call came through, and she'd known it was Vaughn and had answered anyway. She didn't know how Chen had her direct number, and she didn't ask. I wanted to explain something, he said, that I didn't put in the recordings. Maya sat down. Go ahead. When I was working for Vaughn's organization, Chen said, I did things I'm not proud of. I drafted documents. I structured agreements. I told myself it was legal work, that I was just providing legal services, that the ethics of what the client did with those services was separate from my professional responsibility. He stopped. That's not true, obviously. I knew. I've always known. But I kept working there for 2 years because the money was very good and because it was easier to keep going than to stop. What made you stop, Maya said. A pause. There was a woman, he said. Older woman, ran a flower shop. She came into the office one day to sign a document I had drafted, and she brought her granddaughter with her. The granddaughter was maybe 6 years old, and the woman signed the document, and I watched her hands shake while she did it. And afterward, she looked at her granddaughter and then looked at me, and she didn't say anything. She just looked at me. Another pause. I left the organization 2 weeks later. I kept the files. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I was afraid. I'm still afraid. But you called, Maya said. Tommy Briggs reached out to me 6 months ago, Chen said. He didn't pressure me. He just told me that when I was ready, he was building something, and there was a place in it for what I knew. He said some people were going to need what I had, and that it was my choice, entirely my choice, when I decided to give it. His voice was careful and direct, and had the quality of someone making a confession they have rehearsed many times in private and are finally delivering in public. I'm sorry it took me this long. Maya thought about the flower shop, about Ann Briggs. She thought about whether Ann Briggs was the woman with the shaking hand and the granddaughter, and whether it mattered, whether naming it would change what it had cost or what it had built. What you did, she said to Chen, is what matters. Not when, not how long it took. The recordings you provided are the reason the investigation moved as fast as it did. The recordings are the reason the people who did this are not still doing it. She paused. You were afraid and you called anyway. That's not a small thing. Don't make it smaller than it is. She heard him breathe on the other end of the line. The woman with the shaking head. Is she, do you know if she's going to be all right? I don't know yet, Maya said, but there's a path now. There wasn't one before. Okay, he said very quietly. Okay. He hung up. Maya sat with her phone in her hand for a long moment. Then she went to the doorway of the service bay and looked at Jackson, who was elbow deep in a motorcycle engine and completely, genuinely focused on what he was doing in the way that only happens when a person is doing something they were built for. Jackson, she said. He looked up. Grease on his forearm, the same gray t-shirt, the same unhurried steadiness in his eyes. Ann Briggs's flower shop, she said. She used to bring her granddaughter to business meetings. Jackson looked at her for a moment, reading something in the way she'd said it. We'll make sure she's on the list for the civil recovery process, he said. First priority. Maya nodded. She went back to the counter. The second twist came 2 weeks later. And nobody saw it coming. Which is the nature of the second twist by the time you've processed the first one. You've stopped bracing for the next. It came in the form of a certified letter from the county assessor's office. The letter was addressed to Reed Cycles and Rentals. Attention, Jackson Reed. And it's formal, Bureaucratic language described an administrative review of 3 commercial properties in Silver Creek, whose ownership records had been flagged as potentially containing irregularities connected to the ongoing Halcyon Properties investigation. One of those 3 properties was the hardware store that had belonged to Frank DeLuca's family. Frank DeLuca had sold it, or believed he'd sold it, 18 months ago and left Silver Creek. He had taken his wife and his adult son and moved to his brother's place in New Mexico because the sale had not gone the way it should have, and the money had been less than it should have been, and by the time any of it was done, he had been so exhausted and so defeated that leaving was the only thing that still felt possible. The letter said the ownership transfer was under review. The letter said the transaction might not have been legally valid. Maya called Webb. "Is what I think this is actually what this is," she said. The DeLuca property transfer was executed using documentation we believe was part of the same forged instrument series as the documents you found in Jackson's filing cabinets, Webb said. "If the instruments are invalidated, which our current assessment suggests they will be, the transfer may be void. The property could revert." "Could revert," Maya said carefully. "He's legally complex," Webb said. "I won't overstate it." "But it's possible." Maya hung up. She sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she did something she had not planned to do and would not have predicted she was going to do if you'd asked her that morning. She found Frank DeLuca's brother's number in New Mexico through 3 phone calls and a patient conversation with a woman at the hardware supplier Frank's store had used for 20 years who had a general sense of where he'd gone. She called the number. A man answered who was not Frank, and she explained who she was and what she needed. And the man told her to hold on, and she heard the phone being set down and footsteps in a door. And then a different man came on the line, older, with the voice of someone who had been through something and was still on the other side of it, still finding his footing. "Frank DeLuca," he said, "wary. Who's this?" She told him. She told him everything, not the full 7 hours, but the shape of it, the essential facts, the investigation, the invalidated instruments, the certified letter from the assessor's office, the words legally complex and it's possible. Frank DeLuca did not speak for a long moment after she finished. When he did, his voice had a quality in it that Maya had heard once before in Ann Briggs on the phone, in the specific timbre of someone who has been strong for too long and has been given permission to stop pretending. But Frank's version was different from Ann's. Ann's had been relief. Frank's was something rawer than that. Something closer to the sound a person makes when they understand that the thing they gave up might not, in fact, be gone forever. "He's 3 generations," he said. "My grandfather opened that store." "I know," Maya said. "You're telling me there's a chance." "I'm telling you there's a path," she said. "The same thing I'm telling everyone. It's not a guarantee. It takes time. But there's a path and there wasn't one before." Frank was quiet again. Then he said, "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" And Maya thought about how to answer that. She thought about the question Carol had asked. The night it all happened. "Why are you doing this?" And the answer she'd given. About returning a favor. About someone standing up for her once. That was still true. But sitting here 2 weeks later, with the certified letter in front of her, and Frank DeLuca's voice in her ear, and 32 businesses, and the weight of what it meant to build something that reached further than she'd expected, she found that the answer had grown. Because 14 months ago, she said, a man named Robert Chen watched a woman's hand shake while she signed something she didn't fully understand, and he stayed silent because he was afraid. And 2 weeks ago, he stopped being afraid. And because of that, we have evidence that might give you your grandfather's store back. She paused. Every time someone decides it's worth doing something, the reach of it goes further than they can see. I'm just trying to keep the reach going. Frank didn't say anything for a moment. Then, roughly, "Thank you. Thank your neighbor," Maya said. Jackson Reed. He made one phone call. None of the rest of it happens without that. 6 weeks after the night that changed everything, the state attorney general's office filed formal charges. The charging document was 47 pages long and listed 11 counts against Derek Vaughn, including conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, witness tampering. The call to Maya at 3 in the morning had in fact been traced and was now documented, and racketeering under the Colorado Organized Crime Statute. Sandra Pruitt faced 4 counts relating to her role in the notarization scheme. Patricia Holt faced 7 counts, the most serious of which related to her use of her position at the Chamber of Commerce to systematically root vulnerable small business owners into the mechanism Vaughn had built. Gregory Taft, the attorney who had retired suddenly to another state, was found and charged in that state under an interstate wire fraud provision that Robert Chen had specifically mentioned in one of his email chains because he knew exactly which transactions had crossed state lines. Maya read the charging document the afternoon it was filed. She read all 47 pages. She read it at the counter of the shop, which was open and busy, because life had resumed its ordinary rhythms, even as the extraordinary things worked their way through the system that would decide what happened to the people who had tried to take this place apart. When she finished reading, she set the document down and looked up, and a customer was waiting at the counter with a question about weekend rental availability. "Sorry about that, she said, and smiled, and helped him. That evening, after the shop closed, and the last customer had left, and Jackson had come in from the service bay and washed his hands and poured 2 cups of coffee that were not going to go cold this time because they were both paying attention, they sat at the counter together. Jackson picked up the charging document and looked at the first page. He read the list of counts. He set it back down. "It's real," he said. "It's real," Maya said. He looked at his coffee. "I keep waiting for the part where it turns out we were wrong about something, where there's a gap in it somewhere that lets him walk." "There's no gap," Maya said. "We didn't leave one." He looked at her. "You didn't leave one," he said. "I want to be accurate about that." "We," Maya said firmly. "Carol's records, Garrett's index, Tommy's timing, Chen's recordings, Carver and Dillon working through the night. The 32 businesses that didn't give up." She met his eyes. "We, every single one of us." Jackson looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I want to make something official." She waited. "I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks," he said. "Since the morning after. Actually, when you said partner on the phone to Ann Briggs and I heard it from the service bay." He picked up his coffee. He was not a man who made speeches, not a man who reached for grand gestures. And what he said next had exactly the quality of someone who has trimmed a thing down to its essential true core. Equal partnership. Your name on the business. Half the decisions, half the work, half whatever this becomes. Maya looked at him. She thought about the reservation folders she'd been sorting when the bell rang 3 weeks ago. She thought about 3 years of showing up to a place where someone treated her with steady, matter-of-fact respect and never made her feel that her presence was conditional on her diminishment. She thought about the filing cabinet and the notary stamp and the 3 a.m. phone call and Ann Briggs crying and Frank DeLuca's voice cracking on the word generations. She thought about Tommy Briggs saying, "That's how it always starts," and about the way 230 engines had filled the silence after everything else had gone quiet. She thought about Elise, who had believed that people could choose to be different, that the life you'd lived didn't have to be the only life available to you. Maya said, "Not complicated, not performed, just true." Jackson nodded. He picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. They sat in the quiet of the shop in the easy, grounded way of people who have been through something together and come out the other side still standing, still present, still choosing to be exactly where they are. Outside, Silver Creek was doing what it did every evening, closing up, settling down, the ordinary commerce of a small town folding itself into the quiet of an ordinary night. Except it wasn't entirely ordinary anymore. It never would be again. Because something had happened here. Something that started with a man making a phone call he hadn't made in 22 years, and a young woman going to the filing cabinet when she could have gone home, and a baker walking in with her canvas tote full of 18 months of careful records because she needed to know if fighting was possible. Because it turned out that it was. And the people who had tried to make 32 families disappear quietly, who had counted on their isolation, on their fear, on their belief that no one was coming, those people were now learning, in the specific, inescapable language of a 47-page charging document, what it cost to be wrong about that. 3 months after the charges were filed, Frank DeLuca came back to Silver Creek. He came with his wife and his adult son, and he stood in front of the hardware store, which was still standing, which was still his, which the court had placed under administrative hold, pending resolution of the ownership dispute. And he put his hand flat against the door the way you touch something you thought you'd lost. He came to the shop after that. He sat with Jackson and Maya for 2 hours drinking coffee, not talking about the investigation or the charges or the court timeline, just talking about the store, about his grandfather, about what it had meant to his family, and what it would mean to come back to it. When he left, he shook Jackson's hand, and then he turned to Maya and he said, with the directness of a man who doesn't have patience for anything less than what's true. You gave me this. I want you to know I know that. We gave each other this, Maya said. That's how it works. Frank looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that's been away for a while and is finding its way back to a face that has missed it. He walked out. The bell above the door rang when he left, the same bell that had rung 3 months ago when 4 men walked in wearing the particular weight of people who believed they had already decided how the story ended. They had been wrong. The story had been decided by a young woman who went to the filing cabinet instead of going home, by a quiet man who made one phone call across 22 years of silence, by a baker who walked in with a canvas tote because she needed to know if it was possible, by a paralegal on a motorcycle who said this is beautiful when he saw records kept with care, by 230 writers who came because one brother had finally asked, by every person who had chosen in the specific, unglamorous, exhausting way that real choices are made to stand rather than fold. The bell above the door stopped ringing. Maya went back to the counter. There were reservation folders to sort, customers to help, a business to run, a partnership to build, a town that was still healing and would keep healing for a long time yet, one person and one day and one ordinary act of showing up at a time. She picked up the first folder. She got to work. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be rescued. Maya Collins had learned something better than that. She had learned to be the kind of person who makes rescue possible. And in a small shop in Silver Creek, Colorado, with a bell above the door and motor oil in the air and a partner she trusted completely, that was exactly who she was. Not despite everything she'd survived, because of it.